Hello, this is going to be a series of videos talking about Dune Spice Wars, focused on units and military capabilities inside the game. The goal is that you have a roadmap on how to learn Dune Spice Wars from a unit perspective, the military aspect of the game. There's about 20 different mechanics. What we want to do is get you to the point where you understand what are the 5 important ones, and then after that we'll break down the less important mechanics and walk through examples of how these things look in game. We will not talking about faction specific units, we will not be talking about air units. Air units at the time of recording are very important in the metagame, which also means they're very likely to change quite drastically. It is a melee-centric game because of lore, on a planet that hates you because of lore. But it's very important to keep that in mind. Melee units, all people's elite units, they're all melee units. Your basic units, they're all melee units. Melee units are incredibly powerful. Ranged units have all the benefits of ranged units, but they're not nearly as powerful as you might be expecting. There's very little randomness in the game, right? Most of the mechanics have no random component in it whatsoever. And there are relatively few unit options. And unit production is also very limited. These are some of the things that will set it apart compared to other games you might be familiar with. The number of units that you'll be playing with is also going to be significantly lower than certain other games that focus on much higher unit counts. So let's talk about the basics. These are really the things you have to be aware of. First of all, units themselves. There are 3 types of units. You have military units, you have militia units, you have buildings. All of these have similar mechanics in how they interact with each other. They can deal damage using their power statistic. They have an armor value, they have a health value. They may or may not have a supply value. But the numbers and the way that they interact with each other is the same. Military units are produced at your capital, your main base. They are controlled by you. They are expensive, they are powerful, they have an upkeep cost to them. Militia are produced at villages. They're relatively cheap, they're relatively weak, and they are controlled by AI. Buildings are also produced at villages. They're expensive. They are also they're AI controlled, and they're powerful. Do not underestimate the power of turret. It can eat a small army. Every unit has the same attack speed, and most units have some special rules, but the basic way that units interact with each other and deal damage to each other is very similar. There isn't really a concept of tags. There isn't necessarily like units that have abilities specifically to counter types of units. It's more around armor. Units are split up into effectively 3 different categories. You have the military units, the militia, and buildings. The first category of units, military units, these are the units that are produced in your main base. They will only be produced in your capital, and you go in here, you select what you want to produce, and then you can produce that specific unit. So we can build one of these units. For the ones that you can't access, it will tell you which you need to access it. When you look at the unit in particular, you'll notice that these are relatively powerful. They have a lot going for them compared to the other buildings out there. And you can control these, right? I can tell these units to move over here or over there. That is very different when we compare this to militia. So if we look at a militia, we can build militia for a fraction of the cost. But these are going to be controlled by the AI, and they will act the same way or a similar way than militia units that you encounter in neutral villages. Right? If I build this unit here, it takes a little bit of time to build. That unit's not leaving this base. It will protect, or will not leave its village, will protect its village, and otherwise it's completely controlled by the AI. You can also build certain buildings like missile batteries, which will provide protection as well. Now, building missile batteries or other military structures you give up some economy, right? You put it onto a location, that location doesn't have economy building, so that makes for a pretty big difference. These types of buildings are also controlled by the AI, and they are relatively expensive, especially when looking at it from an upkeep perspective. A unit like this has an upkeep of 6 coins and 3 manpower. If you were to build a missile battery, it's 6 coins, 6 plus creed, and 2 manpower, and it takes up a slot. So there's a lot of opportunity cost to that. It can't move around, and it's not going to fire outside your own territory unless there is an actual engagement going on. Like in general, it was perfectly happy sitting, right next to here. I can build it right here, and it seems like it'd be really cool because it fires outside of our territory. In reality, it's not going to start firing just because there's enemy troops there. Once those troops enter your territory, it'll start firing. So that's not possibly the way you would expect a defensive structure to operate in games that you're familiar with. Okay, let's talk about the unit statistics. So if we go to a specific unit, happens to be these troopers, this is their power, 19. That is their base power. Power can be modified by percentages, sometimes flat amounts. Then we have their health, total health, current health, armor, total armor, or maximum armor, current armor, and supply. All units behave very similar in this regard, and they may have like some special rules, like this one has coordination, but in general every unit has just these numbers, and that's how they interact. Every unit attacks at the same speed. Like there might be like one Atreides unit that happens to break this rule, but for purposes of what we're doing here, it's good enough. Right? So yeah, things move at the same speed. Your armies, there's not many differences there. If you see something with a speed bonus, that is movement speed. It's not attack speed. So figuring out how much damage a ranger does versus how much damage a trooper does is relatively simple. A trooper, under ideal circumstances, does 19 damage. A ranger, under ideal circumstances, does 20 damage. Once these types of abilities start triggering, you will find out that you'll see bonuses above their bars. Right? So if we take these units and we attack a building, one of the things that you start seeing is that, I believe, this unit now has a bonus. It has the focus firepower, which it gained from this unit. So you can always hover over and figure out where things are coming from. The other abilities can be icons. Icons may be much more important than the abilities described with text. In this particular case, they are. Armor is the primary mechanic that units focus around. And the reason for that is that the amount of damage you take is the power of the attack minus the armor. Right? It's a flat reduction. Power can be between 6 and 25-ish on units, 50 to 80 on buildings. For a armor, it's usually 0 to 5, but can be buffed up to like 10. Turrets have an armor of 10, a main base will have like an armor of 20. Armor, because of this, is much more effective to smaller hits This is very important when we discuss the next topic about pinning down ranged units. But one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that armor can also be damaged. Right? There are units that have abilities that usually have a 30% chance to reduce the armor by 1. This is how units that may only hit for 20 damage can take down a main base, because you can reduce that 20 armor on the main base to 0. And now your units hit for 20 damage instead of 1 or 2. So, every unit has an armor value. It has a current and a maximum armor value. So we are going to attack this village. And what you'll see is that we have these units here. They have an armor value of 2, a power of 12. Our armor values are 5 with power of 19. Now, you'll see that this particular unit has an armor value of 4 out of 5. And this particular unit has an armor value of 2 out of 5. So what's happening here, right? Because these numbers are a lot lower. Well, what's happening is that we are breaking armor. We have a unit which has a demolition ability. Because we have a unit with the demolition ability, it can reduce armor. This is a really big deal, because the damage a unit takes is the power minus armor. If you have a unit that has a low damage, like 7, and you're attacking something with an armor of 5, then you would only do 2 points of damage. On the other hand, once that armor goes down, the amount of damage a 7 power unit does drastically goes up. Right? Initially the first hit would do 2 points of damage. If armor break triggers, you start doing 3 points of damage. That's 50% more effective damage. Armor break is a very important mechanic to understand, because it can have such drastic effects on the actual damage you're able to do. Base power of units is like 6 to 25. Buildings, it can be 50 to 80. And armor values tend to be between 0 and 5. But they can be buffed to like 10-ish. Turrets will have a armor value of 10. Other buildings also have armor values, but you rarely care. And a main base has an armor value of 20. Which means that if you have a capital, which is right here, it has 20,000 health, 20 armor. Unless you use demolition units to reduce this armor, you're not going to get through. So yeah, that is one of the most important aspects of the game as far as mechanics and the way units counter each other. Is there's units with armor, and there is units that have this armor break ability, which is called demolition. And it's important to keep track of. One of the next topic is the range units. Range units have the benefit of range, right? You can hit from further away than melee units. You can shoot down a ledge. You can shoot over other units. It's amazing. In this game they also get pinned down, and once you're pinned down, your power drops by 50%. Right? That means that if you have a damage or power of 22 against 5 armor, you would hit for, let's ignore the 18, that's supposed to be 17 damage per second. But if you're pinned down, your power drops to 11 against 5 armor, and you do 6 damage per second. Right? Your damage just didn't get cut by 50%. Your damage got cut by 2/3. It's very important to keep that in mind. Right? Range units have the benefit of more DPS uptime. You don't have to move as far. You can easily move on to the next target because it's probably already in range. But you have to shield them with melee infantry. Right? They also need more space on the battlefield, which is important in this game, right? Because the amount of safe space to have a fight is limited. Ranged units like to be further away from the enemy, so they prefer more spacious areas. Ranged units, in general, are bad on their own, unlike melee units, which are fine on their own. And they can damage air units, but they don't necessarily counter air units because air units have far superior mobility. Let's talk about ranged units. It's a futuristic game, there's lots of guns, so we can build troopers, and we have rangers. This is for Atreides happens to be. The rangers have the perk that they do ranged damage, which seems like it would be a pretty sweet deal. They are roughly the same cost, so let's try out and see what happens. We're gonna create 2 units. We're going to have a trooper and a ranger, and we are going to go and send them at villages, and we're going to take a look at the mechanics on how this is going to work out. Because it is very important to keep in mind how the balance between melee and ranged works out. And the reason for that is that ranged units can suffer pinned down. Suffering pinned down is a very large detriment. Right. So we're going to take these 2 units. This happens to be a little base which has 2 ranged militia. So we can use them. And for reference, our ranger has an armor of 3 and our trooper has an armor of 5. So let's take our 2 units and let's attack this town. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So what happened with this attack to the town is that the first action was taken by a ranged unit. So you'll see our ranged unit is taking quite a bit of damage. It's subtracting 3 from the damage, but the hits it's taking are substantial, right? We're taking 12, 13 damage. Now the reason that that number is so high compared to the amount of damage our trooper takes, like our trooper is also taking some damage, it's taken about 40 damage. Our ranger in the same amount of time has taken about 150 damage. That is because ranged units suffer pinned down. And you can see it on this unit over here, pinned down. That reduces their power to half before armor is taken into account. Right, so this makes a very, very, very big difference. So if we take this same little setup, and now we're going to just take a look at how much we can accomplish with a single melee unit. And what we want to do is just show the semi-absurd power differential that you have between ranged and melee units because of this pinned down behavior. Right, so we have our single melee unit. Our single melee unit is going to walk over to this town. And what we're going to do is we're going to pin both of the enemy ranged units. We attack the town. We specifically move next to the town. You see one unit is fighting, punching. One unit is shooting. We're going to engage the other unit. And now you see that both units are punching. This means that these militia units, which normally do 16 damage, only do 8 damage. Our armor is 5, so we take 3 damage per hit. And as you might imagine, we can sit here for a little while, and the end result is that we are not really going to take enough damage to worry about. A single trooper with a little bit of micro against some ranged units will be more effective than a trooper and a ranged unit with micro. If we had sent 2 ranged units against this village without any micro, we very well may have lost one. Right? Because the disparity is just that big. We're still above half health and the first unit is already fallen. So it is very important to keep in mind that ranged units can provide incredible benefit, but unless you have a critical mass of infantry, like melee infantry, to sit in front of these ranged units, you are going to be in a lot of trouble if you ever get engaged. Supply. One of the things about Dune is that it's a harsh environment, and one of the ways that they modeled this is through the supply mechanics. A unit has supply. A unit outside of your territory starts losing supply. This will, once you've lost all your supply, this will actually start draining your health. You run out of health, your unit disappears. Supply recovers very quickly. When you're near a friendly town or an occupied town, you may have to be relatively close. You can turn on the map what it looks like for the resupply zones. And your supply really limits how far your military can be effective. Right? If you don't have enough supply to move 2 regions away, then that also means that you can't effectively conduct military operations that far from home. This also means that your first military unit can't move across the map. They will get 2 regions away and die. If you're in a deep desert, your supply drain goes up drastically. And there's also some units, like ornithopters, which are unaffected by the supply mechanic. Talk about supply. Troopers have supply. This is last number. This tells you how far away you can go before you get in trouble. If we send troopers outside of our territory, then their supply is going to start going down. It is important to keep this in mind because this, to a large degree, limits how far you can project your power. Right? If we send these to this medium distance village, still in an adjacent region, one of the things you'll notice is that we will have burned about half of our supply just getting there. So we can now take this village, but if we don't do that, what's going to happen is our supply is going to keep on ticking down. Once a supply gets to the point where it's 0, then we get into a lot of trouble. Our health is going to start going down first, and when you run out of health, well, you die. But you do have some time to maneuver here and there. Right now we are hitting the point where we have 0 supply and our health starts ticking down. And as you can see, these units don't have the same number of hit points. It is a percentage of your health that you're losing. It goes pretty quickly. As soon as you get back into your territory, you'll notice that health stops ticking down, but you still, it's still ticking down. You need to get to a resupply zone at this point to not die. As soon as you're in the resupply area, you'll see that these little bars are filling up pretty quickly, and your health also starts to regenerate in those cases, if it's friendly. So, there's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're dealing with supply. One, if you need to go very far away, like for instance over here we have a point of interest and we want to investigate that, we want to make sure that we have enough movement to go over there and investigate it. And our hope is that we don't run out of supply before we are done investigating. Right? In this particular case we're fine because we didn't have to go very far, but just inspecting this box right on the border of our territory, it looks like we are going to burn through half of our supply, more than half of our supply. Yeah, we're at 100 and we're down to 40 supply. Right, so it goes pretty quickly. It really limits your ability to do things outside of your territory. The other thing to keep in mind is that if we are running into a deep desert, supply goes down very fast. So if we have one unit that is on the board inside the border of a deep desert and the other unit is not, you'll see there's a little icon over here that explains what's going on. This unit is losing far more supply than the units outside of it. Right? This unit is already getting to the point where it's going to start taking health damage, whereas the unit outside of it is absolutely not at that point. This makes for a pretty big difference. So even though, you know, it looks like they're next to each other, one of them has a chance of coming back home alive, the other one probably does not. So that is what you need to know about supplies. Other than that, the Ornithopter does not care about supply. It's pretty special. Pillage. One of the things that's unique about Dune is that your army can produce resources. And the way you do that is by pillaging villages, neutral villages, enemy villages, or there's just certain objectives on the map you can pillage, sometimes once, sometimes repeatedly. After this, the village will be devastated. Right? And so you can't just keep pillaging the same target, it will take a little bit of time before it's available again. The pillagers resupply and get the resources. This is important to keep in mind, because what you can do is you can pillage a neutral village to allow your units to go 2 regions away. Right? You can use pillage as a resupply point for your military. Later game you can pillage more difficult targets, like I believe there's marauder bases that are set up, or there's Fremen sieges, which can also be pillaged. Atreides cannot pillage neutral villages, but they can pillage enemy villages and late game targets. This has a large impact on the early game. The cost of annexing a village is increased after you pillage it. The production in a village is reduced while it is devastated. Buildings are, however, not destroyed when you pillage a village, and the village is still under its original control after the pillaging. Pillaging is a unique mechanic that really sets Dune Spice Wars apart. And the reason for that is that we have the ability to generate resources from our military. So we have our minions. They are going to go start a fight. We make sure that we engage the enemy ranged units. And now we watch them fight. After we are done with this, we're going to select Pillage, and we're going to talk through some of the effects it has and how it works. There are very good reasons to pillage in this game. And the first one, of course, is that you get quite a bit of resources for doing this. So if we select Pillage, this is 458 coins, or Solaris. Now there's a couple of things to notice. First of all, while we are here and our troops are doing their pillaging, you'll notice that we actually replenished our supply. We went back up to 100 supply. The other thing is that this village right now is hostile. It requires more annexation to cost to annex, 30%, and devastated. It also has negative 50% local production. More importantly, we are no longer recovering supply. So now we have 2 options. We either can go to the next village and raid them, or go to friendly territory and hopefully get there in time before anybody dies. So Dune itself, when you're playing the game, you want to stay on the rocks. If you stay on the rocks, you're safe from Shai-Hulud. If you walk off of the rocks, they may show up and eat you. There's also storms. Nowhere is safe from storms. Storms are relatively slow moving, but their appearance is random, and the direction they move on, that seems to be random as well. Fighting on sand is likely to summon Shai-Hulud. The more units are involved, if they're fighting on the sand, you will likely see them. Harvesters can also have a decent track record of summoning Shai-Hulud. You might not have a lot of notice before your units start to vanish, but you do get a little flashing warning signs for units which are about to get eaten. Let's talk about Some of the wonderful parts of the world. First of all, storms. Storms are pretty heinous. Your best bet is to run away. If you don't run away, the units that are caught in the storm are likely to die. Buildings will take significant damage. And storms are random. On the other hand, if you want to start a fight and fight on sand, you can summon worms more reliably. For the purposes of this demo, we will ask the worm to just politely show up. You'll see the wavy sand over here, and then after a little bit of time, chances are that the wavy sand is going to gobble up your unit. You do get these little warning signs that say there is a nearby sandworm. It gives you some time to get onto this land, and if you're not, then, you know, sandworm. As soon as you are on solid ground, the icon will diminish, but if you then decide to run out again and see what happens, you are prone to discover what happens. Okay, this wraps up the beginner course, I guess, beginner video on unit mechanics. If you focus on these initial mechanics, you are probably going to get pretty far in this game. There's a lot of mechanics, it's very easy to get distracted by other things. None of the other mechanics will have as large an impact as the ones we've discussed so far. The mechanics we've discussed so far are things that can make or break a game, right? You will lose an army. Your units will do half damage or less. Unlike some of the other mechanics, which are more like, you get a 20% bonus to damage. It's a very different numbers that you'll be talking about once you look at the other ones. There will be more videos to start talking about the next tier of mechanics, and then a final video which will be discussing just the fringe mechanics. Let me know if you've enjoyed this video, and if it's worth creating more of these videos to cover the other engagements you can have in Dune, whether it be through operations or politics or economy.